On a quiet morning, an 82-year-old man was handcuffed, humiliated, and dragged away like a criminal by police, all for a petty theft accusation right before his stunned neighbor's eyes. But 1 hour later, a military SUV rolled in, revealing a truth that left the town speechless. Who was this old man, and what had those fools unleashed? Listen to a story of courage, loyalty, and a slap of justice that silenced the ignorant. Under the gentle morning sun in the small town of Bitterroot, Montana. Soft breezes swept through wide grassy fields, carrying the scent of earth and the cheerful chirps of birds. Henry Callahan, an 82-year-old man, stood on the porch of his modest wooden home, watering the wildflowers he'd planted since his wife passed. His faded flannel shirt, worn at the shoulders but neatly pressed, clung to his frail frame. A weathered cap, embroidered with USMC veteran, shaded his snow-white hair. His deep eyes, carrying memories of Vietnam's smoke and fire, quietly followed the water's flow, as if whispering to days long gone. He lived alone, but never lonely, finding joy in small tasks, watering plants, fixing fences, or chatting with neighbors over the wooden fence. Today, humming an old tune, he was watering his flowers when a police cruiser screeched onto the dirt road leading to his house. The siren's wail shattered the morning's peace. 2 officers stepped out, their eyes cold, hands resting on holsters. "Mr. Callahan, you're accused of stealing a power drill from Bitterroot General Store, a few blocks away," one said, his voice stiff. Henry stopped watering, his eyes flashing surprise, but he stayed calm, his voice warm, steady. "You've got the wrong man. I haven't left my house all morning." But before he could finish, a younger officer, impatient, stepped forward, grabbing his arm. "Don't lie, old man. The camera caught someone who looks like you. Neighbors, mowing lawns or standing in yards, turned to watch, their eyes a mix of curiosity and unease." Before Henry could explain, the officer sneered, his voice mocking, "Don't play innocent. Think you'll get away with it." They shoved him, making him stumble, and cuffed him with rough force. The handcuffs bit into his thin wrists, and in the struggle, his face scraped the sidewalk, a bloody scratch blooming on his cheek. The clink of the cuffs echoed in the stillness, like a knife to the hearts of onlookers. Neighbors froze, some whispering, but none dared intervene. Henry, though in pain, didn't resist, his eyes calm, as they'd been facing shellfire at Khe Sanh in 1968. They yanked him into the cruiser, the door slamming shut, and the siren wailed again, carrying him away under the shocked gazes of the neighborhood. In his small home, the hose kept running, water spilling onto the path, a reminder that the peaceful morning had been broken and a storm was coming to Bitterroot. The police cruiser carrying Henry Callahan sped down dirt roads, kicking up a cloud of dust. Henry, 82, sat in the back, his hands cuffed tight, the scratch on his cheek still oozing blood, staining his old flannel shirt. His USMC veteran cap was knocked askew in the struggle and hung loosely on his head, but his eyes remained calm, deep as if seeing past the officers, back to the smoke and fire of Khe Sanh in 1968. The air inside the car was stifling, the smell of burnt rubber mingling with tension. Henry spoke, his voice low, clear. "Officers, I wasn't at that store this morning. I was home, watering my plants. Neighbors saw me." But the young officer driving cut him off, his tone mocking. "Old folks stealing tools? Now you think we'll buy that story?" The older officer beside him glanced at Henry through the rearview mirror, his eyes cold, as if he'd already made up his mind. They didn't check further, didn't make a call to verify, relying only on a grainy security video they claimed showed someone looking like him. Henry fell silent, not arguing, but a deep sadness stirred within, not from the cuffs, but from an injustice that echoed the times he'd seen comrades forgotten after the war. The cruiser pulled up to the Bitterroot police station, a low red brick building with an American flag drifting lazily out front. They yanked Henry from the car, their rough handling making him stumble, the scratch on his cheek bleeding again. A few passers-by paused, their eyes curious, but none dared ask. In the interrogation room, Henry was shoved onto a hard chair, the cuffs still biting his wrists. A young officer smirking, stood before him, flipping Henry's worn USMC cap in his hands, planning to flash some old medals to get out of this. His voice was sharp, dripping with scorn. Henry lowered his head, saying nothing, his eyes fixed on the concrete floor, as if summoning the patience that had carried him through Vietnam's shellfire nights. They offered no lawyer, no proper evidence, and just held him in the cold room as if he were already guilty. Outside the station, the town hummed along, but in Henry's neighborhood, whispers began to spread. Neighbors who'd seen him watering plants that morning started questioning, their silence during his arrest now a gnawing regret. In his small home, the hose kept running, water flooding the path, a reminder of the injustice that had struck, and a spark of hope kindling somewhere, just out of sight of the officers who wouldn't listen. The story of Henry Callahan, the 82-year-old man handcuffed on his own porch, left his neighbors stunned. Those who'd seen him watering plants that morning, who'd chatted with him over the fence, now gathered in clusters, their eyes a mix of curiosity and guilt. They knew Henry, a former Marine, an honest man always ready to help fixing cars for free, mowing the neighbor's lawn. But when the police cruiser took him away, no one spoke up, and that silence now gnawed at their hearts. In the house next door, Melissa Harper, a middle-aged woman with brown hair tied low, stood by her window, clutching the curtain, her gaze fixed on the dirt road where Henry was cuffed. Melissa, once a coordinator for a veteran support program in Missoula, understood the worth of men like Henry. She'd heard his stories not boasts, but quiet tales of comrades, of long nights at K-San, and how he kept his old USMC cap as a reminder of loyalty. That morning, she'd seen it all: the police shoving him, mocking him, the blood trickling down his cheek as his face scraped the sidewalk. Her blood boiled, not just at the injustice, but at the apathy of those around her, herself included, who'd stood silent. Melissa couldn't stay still. She grabbed her phone, her hand trembling with anger, and dialed an old friend, Tom Reynolds, at the Veterans Affairs office in Helena. Her voice was urgent, clear. Tom, Henry Callahan, my neighbor, was just cuffed by police for a theft he didn't commit. They insulted him and dragged him off like a criminal. He's a Marine who fought in Vietnam. We have to do something. On the other end, Tom, a former soldier who'd worked with Melissa on support programs, listened intently. He knew Henry's name, not just from records, but from stories of a Marine who saved lives during brutal shelling in 1968. Send me everything. Melissa, I'll contact the base. Melissa snapped a quick photo of Henry's USMC cap, left abandoned on the path, and sent it with the details. She stood in her yard, her eyes locked on the police station at the town's edge, as if to say Henry wasn't alone. Meanwhile, in Henry's small home, the hose kept running, water flooding the path, like a symbol of injustice yet to be cleaned. But somewhere, beyond the gaze of officers who wouldn't listen, a flame of justice had been lit, sparked by the courage of a neighbor who refused to stand by. In the small town, whispers about Henry Callahan's arrest spread from wooden houses along dirt roads to the general store where it all began. But at Fort Harrison Military Base, miles away, a greater wave was forming, sparked by Melissa Harper's call. Melissa, standing in Henry's yard, had just sent the photo of his worn USMC cap and details to Tom Reynolds, her friend at the Veterans Affairs office in Helena. Tom, a grizzled former soldier with salt and pepper hair and a steady voice, received the message while reviewing veteran support files. When he saw Henry's name, his eyes froze as if an old memory stirred. He knew Henry not just from stories, but from tales told by Marines about the commander who saved 11 men during brutal shelling at Khe-Sanh in 1968. His blood boiled, not just at the injustice, but at the insult to a man who'd given everything. Tom didn't hesitate, immediately calling the Military Advisory Center at Fort Harrison, where many of Henry's former comrades still worked. On the other end, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Graves, a tall man with a weathered face, answered. Michael had been a young soldier under Henry in Vietnam, pulled from gunfire by his steady hand, now a commander of an advisory unit at the base. Tom, what's urgent? Michael's voice was calm, but Tom couldn't stay composed. Henry Callahan, former Marine, was cuffed by Bitterroot police for supposedly stealing a drill. They mocked him, dragged him off like a criminal, and gave him no chance to explain. Michael, he's the man who saved you, saved me, saved our unit. We can't let this slide. Michael gripped the phone, his eyes sharpening as if memories of Quezon, the thunder of shells. Henry's firm grip flooded back. Without another word, he stood, his voice firm. I'll handle it. Get a vehicle ready. This isn't official, but it's a matter of honor. Within 10 minutes, a black military SUV, unmarked, was prepped at Fort Harrison. Michael, in crisp uniform, climbed in with 2 other officers, carrying a classified military file on Henry. The engine roared, and the SUV sped out of the base gates, tearing toward Bitterroot, leaving a trail of dust on the highway. In the town, no one knew of the wave coming, and no one suspected that Melissa's call from a small house by a dirt road had reached beyond Bitterroot, touching soldiers still loyal to their old commander. In Henry's home, the hose kept running, water flooding the path, a symbol of an injustice waiting to be cleansed. But at Fort Harrison and on the road to Bitterroot, a silent vow had been set in motion, promising justice for a man who'd stood firm on the edge of life and death. In the cold interrogation room of the Bitterroot police station, Henry Callahan sat on a hard chair, his thin hands still tightly cuffed, the scratch on his cheek dried into a dark red streak. The flickering fluorescent light cast shadows over his worn USMC cap, tossed carelessly on the table before him. Henry, 82, kept his eyes calm, deep, as if seeing through the concrete walls, back to the smoke and fire of Quezon in 1968, where he'd pulled 11 comrades from a hail of shells. But here, in this room, no one cared about his past. A young officer, smirking, leaned against the wall, flipping through papers, his voice dripping with sarcasm, planning to flash some old medals to get out of this, or spin war stories to make us let you go. Henry didn't reply, his gaze fixed on the floor, not from fear but from patience forged through years of war. They offered no lawyer, no proper evidence. Holding him on a grainy security video they claimed showed someone who looked like him. The air in the room was stifling, the ticking clock on the wall counting the seconds of injustice. Outside the station, Bitterroot hummed along, unaware of the wave approaching. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from the front yard, the growl of a military machine. Officers in the station looked up, their eyes darting to the window. A black military SUV, unmarked, pulled up in the yard, gleaming under the noon sun. The door swung open, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Graves stepped out, his crisp uniform adorned with glinting medals, his weathered face radiating authority. Behind him, 2 officers followed, their postures rigid, eyes sharp. The station seemed to hold its breath. A desk clerk rushed out, stammering, "Sir." "What's this about?" Michael didn't answer, striding through the glass door, his boots thudding firmly on the tile floor. In the interrogation room, the young officer mocking Henry froze as the door swung open. Michael stood there, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on Henry. At that moment, an invisible bond formed, 2 soldiers connected by silent sacrifices. Michael stood at attention, raising a slow, solemn Marine Corps salute. "Sir, it's an honor to stand before you." His voice boomed, making the young officer step back, his face paling. Officers throughout the station from the chief to clerks crowded the hallway, their eyes a mix of confusion and dread. No one spoke, no one moved, only the sound of their racing heartbeats filled the air. Michael turned to the young officer, his gaze like a blade, who ordered him cuffed. No one answered, but their silence was a confession. The Bitterroot police station, once certain of Henry's crime, now stood stunned before a man carrying a file and a story poised to shake the town to its core. The air in the Bitterroot, Montana, police station drained of life, leaving only a tense silence that gripped the room. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Graves stood in the hallway, his crisp uniform gleaming, his piercing eyes sweeping over the officers, landing on Henry Callahan, still in the interrogation room, his frail hands cuffed, the dried blood on his cheek a silent accusation. Henry's worn USMC cap lay on the table, but his deep, calm eyes remained steady as if seeing through the concrete walls. back to the smoke and fire of Khe Sanh in 1968. The officers, from the young one who'd mocked him to the chief in the corner, stood silent, their nervous glances betraying their dawning regret. Michael strode into the room, slamming a thick military file stamped with the Marine Corps classified seal onto the table. His voice boomed, clear, shattering the silence like a hammer. The man you cuffed saved 11 comrades during a shelling at Khe Sanh in 1968. He led us through gunfire when all hope was gone. Without him, I wouldn't be here to say this. The officers froze, their eyes shifting from Michael to Henry, as if seeing the 82-year-old for the first time, not just an old man, but a hero. Michael opened the file, his voice steady, heavy with truth. Henry Callahan, Marine Sergeant, awarded the Silver Star for valor. He refused public honors, choosing to live quietly in this town. You call him a thief. You cuffed the man who kept this country safe. The young officer who'd taunted Henry stepped back, his face pale, hands trembling as he dropped his papers. The police chief, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, stepped forward, stammering. We didn't know, sir. It was a misunderstanding from the camera. Michael cut him off, his eyes like a blade. Misunderstanding. You mocked him, shoved him to the ground, and cuffed him without checking evidence. That's not a misunderstanding. That's an insult. His voice turned sharp, commanding. Release him, now. An officer fumbled, hands shaking so hard he dropped the key, but he uncuffed Henry. Henry rubbed his wrists, standing slowly, his eyes free of anger, only a distant sadness, as if used to a world forgetting his deeds. Michael stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder, his voice softening. Sir, we're sorry you had to endure this. Henry nodded faintly, his voice low. It's all right, Michael. I just want to water my plants. The chief bowed his head, his voice trembling. Mr. Callahan, we're sorry. We'll investigate and ensure this never happens again. Henry didn't reply, only picked up his USMC cap, placed it on his head, and walked out, his steps slow but firm. Outside the station, a crowd gathered, news of the military SUV spreading like wildfire. They stood stunned, watching Henry, once cuffed like a criminal, now escorted by a lieutenant colonel and 2 officers. The story of him, of Khe Sanh, of 11 lives saved, rippled through their eyes, their whispers, leaving Bitterroot reeling from the truth unveiled. Justice had been served not with bullets, but with the weight of honor and loyalty. The gentle afternoon sun bathed Bitterroot, but the air now carried a new weight, as if Henry Callahan's story had kindled a quiet flame in every heart. Just 1 week after the incident at the police station where Henry, an 82-year-old man, was cuffed for a theft he didn't commit, only to be vindicated by Lieutenant Colonel Michael Graves and a military SUV, the town had changed. The initial whispers, laced with curiosity and guilt, had turned to deep respect. Henry, with his worn USMC cap and slow steps, was no longer just the neighbor watering plants on his porch. He was a living symbol of courage, of silent sacrifices at Khe Sanh in 1968, where he saved 11 comrades amid a storm of shells. At Bitterroot's town hall, an impromptu ceremony was held one weekend evening, drawing hundreds from farmers to the store owner who'd seen Henry's arrest. The hall overflowed, standing room only. On stage, Henry sat quietly, his deep eyes scanning the crowd. No trace of triumph. The police chief, who'd bowed his head in apology at the station, stepped to the podium, his voice trembling. Mr. Callahan, we were wrong. We're sorry for the injustice you endured. This town owes you our gratitude. The crowd applauded, but Henry only nodded, his gaze drifting to the window, as if remembering comrades who never returned. Melissa Harper, the neighbor who'd called Veterans Affairs, stood in the front row, her eyes shining with pride, knowing her small act had transformed a community. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Graves, in crisp uniform, was there too, a hand on Henry's shoulder, his voice warm, steady. This man didn't just save me. He saved a generation of soldiers with his courage. He doesn't need our honors, but we need to give them so we never forget. The crowd rose, their applause thundering, and for the first time, Henry smiled a faint, humble smile like the one he'd worn watering his plants. After the ceremony, those who'd silently watched Henry's arrest lined up outside the town hall, one by one approaching to apologize. An elderly woman, voice choked, grasped his hand. "I was there, and I did nothing. Please forgive me." Henry nodded, his voice low. "It's all right, ma'am. I understand." A week later, a bronze plaque was erected outside his small wooden home, inscribed, "Once cuffed by forgetfulness," now a living symbol of timeless honor. The plaque gleamed in the sun, becoming a town landmark where parents brought children to hear the story of the Marine who saved 11 lives. Henry's story spread beyond Bitterroot, gracing local papers, then across Montana, a symbol of a community awakened to the value of its soldiers. Henry lived as before, watering plants, fixing fences, but now, each step carried the weight of a restored legacy, forged not by bullets, but by the loyalty and courage of those who refused to stand by. As the evening sun faded, Henry Callahan's story burned on, a flame of honor that never dims. From a man cuffed and shamed, he became a beacon of courage, reminding us to never forget those who sacrificed. Melissa, Michael, and the town stood up, restoring justice for a hero. If this story moves you, share it to spread the flame of loyalty, and don't forget to subscribe to the Silent Valor Stories YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join us in keeping stories like Henry's alive forever.